Now, yes. Start transmission.
Creo que estamos mal cuando se no, en teoría, ¿no? Tiene probado. Sí, se cargaron. Hola. Hello, welcome to the third and last day of our conference. We are beginning with Steven's keynote that's going to be shared by Ian. So from now on, I'm just an attendee, and Ian is in charge of the conference. Thank you, please.
Okay, good morning, everybody. This man doesn't really need much of an introduction, because we've all kind of seen and heard all the many things that he does. But just to remind you, Stephen's a quite a long-term user of C-Sound, about as long as myself. And he's well known as a composer, as well as a developer, and as well as a developer of his own unique front end. It's very interesting, and I would say it's underused as well. So for anybody interested in composing with C-Sound, it's definitely a very strong platform. But we'll see that from Stephen in a moment. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Stephen Yee to tell us how and why I use C-Sound today.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say, first of all, thanks to Luis for organizing this wonderful conference. It's been fantastic. Also to note that I'm going to be projecting the slides this way and not using the presenter because there's some kind of funny color thing happening. So, it's quite a... when I was asked to participate and to give a keynote, I was trying to figure out what would I talk about. I thought that, well, recently, in talking to people that are outside of the C-Sound community, I would get some kind of funny questions when I mentioned, oh, I use C-Sound. Something like, you use C-Sound? Yes. People still use that? Yes. It's so old. Strange question, or strange statement. And I heard this one when I was playing with C-Sound Live, and someone asked me, is that the sound of C-Sound? I thought that was actually sort of a curious and strange question, because most of the programs we use share the same algorithms, and it's, what does it mean then that a program may have a certain sound to it? Is it involved about shared practices and other things? So anyways, it was a kind of curious question. And this was an interesting statement I saw online. It was, I'm a musician, not a programmer. And I thought, like, wow, that's almost offensive to anyone who programs and happens to be a musician as well. That there should be some kind of strange difference between one and the other set up, that if you're a programmer, then you're not being a musician. And I found that odd because oftentimes that recently, when I'm programming, it almost feels like an intuitive process. I'm not really thinking about it. Sometimes the code is just happening and in response to an idea, but I don't feel it's kind of labor. But these are kind of curious things about C sound that I've heard and people have asked, and it made me want to talk about what I enjoy and look for and use in C sound today. And I think for me to articulate that well, I really wanted to go through my own history. Just a little bit about me. He's a composer and a programmer. I've been using C sound since about 1999, really since about 2000, but 1999 would have been my first encounter with C sound. I've been a developer of C sound for quite some time. At first, just an occasional contributor. I fix a bug or something that I happen to see. Later, around the mid-2000s or so, I started to work on the new parser, and I start to get involved with language and more of the core of C sound, so on and so on. I'm the author of a program called Blue, which a lot of the talk today will discuss and show and demonstrate. It's a composition environment built around C sound. And also the author of two closure libraries for music. One's called Pink, another one called Score. Pink is an audio engine that I use for certain things, but it gives me a lot of inspiration to experiment with ideas that I think would be good for C sound. Score is a library for composing that I use both with Pink, but also with Blue, so that I can compose music with C sound. And for those of you who don't know, Clojure is a Lisp programming language. So the agenda, the first thing I want to do is talk about what is C sound. Because I think sometimes it's sort of an interesting question if you really think about it. After that, I want to go through certain stages of my kind of understanding and experience with C sound and how my views on C sound have changed over time. Moving through some certain kind of key points in C sound development that impacted my way of thinking about it. And towards the end, we'll kind of look at maybe getting up to date with today. We'll see what maybe the opportunities for C sound 7 and what that could mean for C sound use moving forward. So the first thing I want to talk about is, before I even get through all this, is what is C sound, right? For me, I like to think about it in terms of three different parts or aspects. One is C sound as a language. Right? The code you write in is defined by this language. C sound as a system, sort of the engine, the compiler, all of the parts of the software that interprets the language and it actually runs. And C sound as a library, something that's used by other developers to create applications. All three of these things are really intermixed, but sometimes it's nice to think about C sound within each of these aspects on their own. Over time, C sound, my perception of C sound changed along these different aspects, but also C sound itself has changed. Sometimes the language has changed, but the system hasn't. In the case of the introduction of so-called syntax sugar. Sometimes the system has changed dramatically, but the language hasn't. So in C sound 6, when the type system was introduced, the existing language of C sound didn't change until we introduced the rates. And finally, the kind of use of C sound as a library has become more and more important ever since its introduction. And it's a kind of key thing that we have to think about is how are we communicating with C sound? Okay, so my first encounter with C sound was in 1999. I was an undergraduate student, and I had been studying really more like electronic music. My first experiences with my professor, Larry Ball, was working with tape, cutting tape, and making tape loops, splicing things, and working with analog synthesizers, ARC 2500 and 2600. And that was a whole semester of class. And the second semester, we had worked with Pro Tools, DX7, Kurzweil, K2000, these kind of things. But it wouldn't, in my mind, these were kind of electronic music things, but not really computer music in the sense of what we have with C-Sound. In the summer of 1999, I took a summer course at UPIC, the Studio of Xenakis, and got exposed to a wide variety of tools. And these were computer music tools, but with it still feels like studio kind of approach, right? Not really the kind of things that we see in the music and software and C-Sound today. But I was at mostly exploring computer music kind of things on my own. And in 1999, I heard about Cecilia. I went so far as to install Linux on my computer, which involved compiling the kernel and all these other things. It was not easy, and my computer was a mess for a while, but I got Cecilia to run enough to see, wow, it's pretty interesting, but somehow it didn't feel right. It was a tool to produce amazing sounds, but I didn't know yet how to compose with that, how to integrate that into a workflow. The other software at the time was, there was a lot of computer software then, commercial music software, multi-track software could be used to kind of organize music. And a lot of shareware programs that were closed source. These were things that were really interesting to use, but I felt very fragile. Software that I would use one month may not work so well the next month, or maybe the previous year I tried something and then the developer no longer decided, oh, I'm tired, I'm done, not going to support it. The things I used at home on my PC didn't work at the studio that our school had, which was OS 9. So there was a kind of tricky time to figure out what's my path, what's my workflow, how am I going to be working as a composer then. I graduated in the end of 1999 and moved to New York. I got a copy of the C-Sound book. At this time, I decided, okay, I'm going to install Linux as full-time. I was very curious and interested. I got the C-Sound book and thought, wow, this is fantastic. Okay, C-Sound looks really interesting to me. The idea of C-Sound, the idea that I could write something on a text file and suddenly have all this sound was really appealing. And in terms of early explorations, it was a lot of inspiration, you know. But then it was also very kind of tricky, right? I had just a C-Sound book. The internet was there, but it wasn't as kind of developed as a resource for learning as it is today. But there was a C-Sound mailing list, and a lot of people there who were very generous with their time to answer questions and help out a new user like me. It was also at this time that I had met Michael Goggins through the C-Sound mailing list and actually met him in person while living in New York. And that was really great to give me a lot of ideas to where to go next. You know? And just to get an idea too, what was my initial C-Sound experience? Well, it looked a lot like this. There was no 0dBFS at the time, but I'm going to use it.
-1.
Okay.
K sums -1.
Oh, it's equals, but it's the resolution of the screen. Yeah. Okay, something funny's happening, but I can't see why.
Oh, and
Oh. Yeah, typo. Yes. That would have taken me like days to have figured out my first kind of tone, right? And I mean, really, this was like not far different from my first experiences of learning C sound, right? I had a book to look at. I had Notepad. And well, in this case, I would have used gedit. I had a terminal that I would have ran C sound. And it took a while to learn. That was the tools that were available. There was no C sound cute, there was no woo, there was no cabbage, there was the command line and your text editor that everything was black and white. You know, no syntax, nothing. It was okay, you know, interesting experience. And at first I thought, oh, this is still cool. You know, I'm still inspired in a way. But you know, learning was slow. It was also in my spare time because I was working. But you know, I tried to write a piece, right? So I wrote a kind of an etude for myself, studying, and I get maybe it takes me a couple weeks, and I have this kind of score file that's maybe 30, 40, 50 line notes. And after working on this piece, I rendered it. Okay, I think I'm done. And I thought to myself, wow, I don't want to do that again, right? And it wasn't, I had to think about it. It was, C sound was interesting, right? The sound production capabilities really, they were there, you know. But for me, the big part that really felt unnatural or slow was the score. Writing score was, felt unintuitive, it felt hard, while writing orchestra code felt pretty straightforward and natural. So here I am, learning to be a programmer, and you know, I decide after talking to Michael that, you know, well, what language should I learn? He says, oh, Java. It's a hard thing. You know, everyone's learning Java. So you can use everyone. I said, okay, I'm gonna learn Java. Sounds great. Spend time learning Java, and after a while, it's hard to learn a programming language when you don't have a goal or a reason to learn it. I decided, okay, I'm going to give myself a project. You know, I just finished this whole thing with C sound and had a kind of interesting experience. But I said, I want a visual timeline. Right? Because for me, I have been used to using visual tools, using, you know, Pro Tools or Keynote or something like that to organize music. I wanted something where I could scale and move score blocks around in time. Right? Blue actually first was called Object Composition Environment, sort of a mouthful. I changed it later to the name Blue because well, I made the interface blue, and it's my favorite color. So it starts off as a way to organize scores, becomes something, a way to process scores, to generate scores, organize instruments, and so on and so on. I don't think when I first started, I had the ambition to make it what it is today, just something to move scores around. But it's become quite featureful. Right? So it's a little hard to see on the screen, but I think that's just the nature of a dark interface. For the next little bit, I'm going to be spending most of the time here with the group. So I'll just play an example here. Right, so we all know Dr. Boulanger's sound file. And this would be representative of kind of the early vision of Blue. I had a orchestra manager here where I would put instruments. Each one would just be C-sound code. In this case, a very simple instrument that played part of a wave file. And the score would have been pretty simple too. A whole lot of different blocks with C-sound score. What I felt at the time was that writing C-sound score in small chunks was okay. It didn't feel onerous in any way. It was actually pretty precise. It came to the point where organizing kind of musical ideas at a higher level is where I felt that the C-sound score was a little too much, especially when you're using multiple notes to represent an idea. Having blocks was a way to organize material. And really I thought, oh, hey, this was sort of my initial goal for what this environment Blue would be. But at the time I was a Flash programmer and I was influenced by the interface of Flash. Right? So a lot of these purple blocks, if I double click them, you'll see that they actually are a sub-timeline. Objects could be, this is called a poly object in Blue. And the poly object is made up of other objects. In this case, various snippets of score material that I've moved around in time and then packaged into a single object. Here, all of these objects are, you can see some of these are made up of other sub-poly objects, made up of other objects, so on and so on. This kind of organization felt natural at the time. So in using this kind of initial interface, the approach was that using this program, you would be a C-sound user first, and this is offering additional tools on top of C-sound for you to use. That was the kind of mindset. It was, oh, okay, you're going to be a C-sound user. You know what C-sound is, but now you're going to have this whole additional layer of organization, visual organization that you can use. It was also the beginning of the whole concept of the sound object here on in the program. And here, each object or each bar within Blue can be one of many different types of objects. I've shown just the generic score so far, and then the poly object which groups them. And if I compare this to the generated C-sound score with its thousands of notes, I would say that I could never have typed this out myself. And this wasn't a generated piece. This was done by hand. I organized the material and moved it around piece by piece. Of course, this example is pretty silly and pedantic, but I think it shows a lot of that early mindset of how I was looking at C-sound and Blue. after that initial phase of getting a generic score working, it became kind of interesting to imagine, well, what other kind of objects could I have? Here we see a piano roll, a pretty common interface found in many digital audio workstations today. In my mind, I thought, well, we have these kinds of objects that are common practice, things that we see now in multiple music software, and that something is a kind of way of notating music that people would know. Maybe it's not the same as Western music notation, but it is a notation, and it is common practice, so it would be something I would like to have in Blue. But being C-sound, I wanted to also take advantage of things that couldn't be done with MIDI and that were really customized towards the kinds of things that C-sound offered. So if you heard it, you would probably say that it's not multi-lingual temperament. And if you were to be able to see more carefully, see if I can zoom in here, you would see that this goes from 8.00 to 8.12. There's actually 13 divisions here. And this is actually 13 divisions of not the octave, but the tritive. Right? This is the Roland-Pierce equal temperament scale. And this piano roll is microtonal. I can load any I can load any Scala scale file, and it will show you the number of divisions per octave or tritive or whatever your period is. If I load a 53 tone scale, it would show you 53 steps. And I thought this would be kind of fascinating. Why not? Right? Why not build this tool that could work with microtonal scales? And it was something that couldn't really be done naturally with the representation of MIDI. Right? So by this point in time, I'm thinking of C-sound not only as a kind of synthesizer and all these things, as textual system, but I start to think about C-sound, the score format, as a data format, something that I target to generate or use, but maybe it's not something I have to use directly myself. Right? The biggest parallel in my mind was thinking about MIDI and system exclusive messages. And I remember experimenting with Cakewalk in the mid-90s and learning about the SysX editor. And I would look at the system exclusive messages and I was like, wow, okay, that's pretty interesting. Then I would look at also the note data and I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. But no one writes music using bytes. Right? We use kind of the tool of the piano roll or whatever else we're working with in the sequencer environment. Right? We have that layer above, and everything underneath is that new data format. So I had this kind of mindset like, oh, let's treat the score as a kind of note format. Maybe I'm not going to look at the generated text, and that's okay. I'm moving a little bit further away from C-sound on its own and looking at it through the lens of this program with Blue. So comes 2004, a few years later, finally finish a piece. It took me a while to get Blue to a certain point. It took me a while to learn C-sound. It took me a while to learn programming. That's okay, right? And I ended up spending a lot of time on Blue, trying to put in one feature after another. In this case, though, I finally get to a point where I have a piece. And this is my first piece using Blue called On the Sensations of Drone. And I'll just narrate on top of it. there is a feature in Glue called the Sound Object Library, one for your project, and now with the most recent version of Glue, one that's for your program-wide library. When the objects in the Sound Object Library here for the project, instances could be created. An instance of an object in the library uses the object within the library to generate its material. So all of these objects are pointing to the same chord in the library, but each one of these can have its own set of properties, right? So this is saying, well, I'm taking that chord, but I'm now playing it here for this duration with this transposition, right? And that's a very common musical concept of kind of a motive and motive transformations, right? And this is the kind of additional layer on top of the seesaw that I was looking at, and what I ended up using for this piece. Here I'm also using something called note processors. These are, there's a number of different kinds used to process a certain key field within a generated score. And this was what allows me to say, oh, I'm going to use this object, but transpose it up an octave, transpose it down an octave, and major second, so on and so on. In this piece, there's a lot of retrogrades being done and inversions across the 8.00 pitch. All this material up here. And this section here, the rest of the piece, is actually the whole beginning of the first piece, or the first part of the piece, played straight through, but just in retrograde. Because it has one note processor here to reverse all the notes. Now, while today I may not notate this kind of music in this piece in this way, this is the way that made sense to me at the time. And the tools of using note processors and writing notes was important. One thing I should note here is that at the root of these things is a Python object. One of the first things I can remember is I gave a presentation on Glue quite some time ago, and I think it was probably my first public presentation on Glue at a DorkBot meeting in New York City. And wanting to make an impression, I guess, I decided, oh, maybe I can make an object that actually just uses Python code. So I embedded the Java version of Python interpreter into Glue. Now I had Python objects where I can use Python code to generate score material. In this case, a couple of notes. And this actually ended up being what was at first a kind of trivial, what could I do it kind of thing, to become a really important part of my musical practice, the use of scripting to generate musical material. In this case, this is also showing a certain practice of mine. Here you see early on, near the beginning of the piece, an object that doesn't generate any notes, it's just setup. And in this case, the setup is a number of objects called performers. I have a kind of abstraction of a performer and a performer group, where I'll write note material or generate note material, and then have the performer object perform that material. And really what that does is the performer has its own spatial location, its own amplitude variance, and other things that it applies to the material. This kind of way of thinking about music, organizing and constructing music, even in 2004, is something I'm still doing today. One thing else to note here is that this Python interpreter is embedded. I'm not using the system pipeline to do it. What this meant was that even though I was working on Linux, I could say if I was at work on a Windows computer, take this project and give it a try. I could also move to a Mac to use this project and give it a try. That code did not depend on anything on the system, right? In terms of dependencies, everything was supplied by Glue, and in that way, I could depend on my project working on any system. Right? I haven't talked about that so much yet, but backwards compatibility and protecting the work of the user is a very important thing to me. Right? How many times have we developed a piece and a year later maybe have a problem opening it up? 2 years later, 5 years later. How many pieces from 10 years ago are able to run today? This was, again, a kind of thing that maybe I didn't think about when I first did it, but maybe became much more important over time. So it was important to me that with Glue, and even at this time, I'm still thinking that maybe the user of Glue is someone who is a CSound user first, right? Maybe they have their own practice, but maybe they don't want to use all of Glue. Maybe they want to use the orchestra system, but I'll show you here right now. This is the visual part of the system. Glue has a GUI builder that you choose to draw your interface by hand. You can move things around, you can make kind of a grid, and make things snap to the grid. You name your objects, and then in your instrument code, you refer to, let's say, if I wanted to refer to the value from that test knob, I would do it this way. Right around, maybe around 2004, 2005, I started to build this GUI builder. And I'll go into it a little bit more in the next example, but just a brief introduction here. Maybe my thought was, maybe if you're a user coming to Glue, you don't want to use all of Glue. Maybe you just want to use the instrument system. And maybe you're kind of a programmer, you want to algorithmically generate everything, right? In this example actually comes much later, but it served its purpose. I translated the piano phase code from Heinrich Taub's common music into closure code, which I've also embedded the closure interpreter into Glue. So, one, I've always loved that example, like in common music, about generating the piano phase. Two, here, this object's properties have it set where time behavior is none, meaning that the score generated from this block is used exactly as is. My thought was at the time that, okay, maybe you like enjoy algorithmic composition, you want to use these different features, maybe just the instrument system in Glue. This is a kind of a demonstration or a way to say, hey, look, you don't have to use the score timeline, but you can use scripting, you can use other parts, you can use it in your own way. And And that object system, that duality between this GUI builder and code would get extended to building score generators. In this case, now, the way this works is similar to the way I'll talk about the Blue Sync Builder. I wrote a little bit of Python code in this case. I left some places where I would have values filled in by items on the interface. I wrote the interface using a kind of line widget, which allowed me to, in this instance, set the kind of edges of a surface that in a way that Tanaka's would have used in metastasis, right? And I would say that maybe, I think in the code, my chord group, which I defined at the beginning of the score, which has 3 performers, is going to perform this surface. So by calculating, looking at the edges of the surface, it can calculate all of the in-between trajectories. But the way I approached it was, I would build this interface to work with, and then as one thing, and then I would use that to create the music, right? So most of the early things I did there with Blue really were using the existing abstractions and concepts in C-Sound that were available to me in C-Sound 4. Right? C-Sound 4 was pretty much what was available when I started working on with C-Sound. C-Sound 5 comes, right? This is 2005, and this is really the big thing for me about C-Sound 5, besides it being cleaned up, is that for reentrancy, which is all part of this other work, is that C-Sound has an API. Right? This was driven a lot by Michael Volumes and Matt Ingalls. This is really to get C-Sound to become a library. When this first happened, I think I didn't really understand. I thought, okay, this is sort of cool, I sort of get it. But on the other hand, by this point, Blue's been working for a while, works pretty well. But the way Blue worked was it would generate a CSV file from all of its representations, and then run C-Sound with that. And I thought, okay, well, what does the API enable? What does it give us? What possibilities does it have? And this would turn out to be pretty important to me. Important to me for my musical practice, important to me for the kinds of things that I would look to use C-Sound for over time. I'll play this track. It's a little bit sort of silly. It sometimes breaks up due to CPU load, but let's see. I'll stop that there. But what we'll see here is that all of these objects here, this is a piano roll, this is a piano roll, this is a piano roll. These are all visual instruments using the graphical user interface editor. This is actually a very interesting thing. Here I am using Blue, here I am using C-Sound, here I am not typing any code. I'm using pre-made objects that I created, right, in this case, but these could be objects that other people created. In this case, this synthesizer is one I'm currently working on. You can tell it's Alpha V3, and it's sort of interesting to go through my older work and see Alpha V1 and Alpha V2, and kind of the approach to the coding underneath. Now, this in and of itself is one thing, but what's become a big part of my practice is Blue Live. Again, this whole split between developing of instruments, developing of sound generators, developing of score generators, and the use of them. Right? So oftentimes, when I'm kind of stuck in my musical practice, I go and just spend time making sounds, making instruments, or making presets. Here I'm using the Blues virtual keyboard. And because this is using the API, I'm able to communicate with C-Sound over channels. Meaning I could, let's see if I can just do this. I'm using this Blue Live feature to repeat a score block. Now, typically at home, I may be using a MIDI keyboard to be what's driving it. But using the API, I've been able to then explore parameters very quickly. And this is, I think, not uncommon for the kind of commercial music world that we have this kind of experience where we're spending time exploring sound, trying to find a preset or adjusting presets against musical material that we're playing or listening to and have written. That's really been a big part of the changes for me in working with C-Sound and Blue. So I'm going to just try to figure out exactly. Perfect. Okay, so C-Sound, Blue, I'm having, really at this point, I'm finding that musically I'm in a good place in terms of what I can do and what I'm interested in. This is something from the last year. One of the earliest sound objects I created was something called Sound. It allowed you to write instrument code in a sound object on the timeline. And what it would do is, behind the scenes, Blue would generate an instrument and create a note for you, just for the duration of the block of the time. When I first created it many years ago, there was no interface, just code. But I thought mentally, like, that's an interesting way to think about working with the C-Sound code, right? But in the past year, I've integrated the GUI builder here with the sound objects. So what does that mean, right? In this case, I have an instrument that plays back a phase recorder file. And I've set up two widgets, one for the time pointer and one for panning. If they were to be a fixed location, it wouldn't be that interesting. But any widget in Blue could be automated. Now, to me, this is a big deal, right? I hadn't thought about it as being a big deal before, but now I'm building a piece out of sound processing and sound generating system or blocks that I, as a user, created using C sound code, using interface. And now that this interface has been built, I can share this object on its own. A user has no need to understand the workings of it. I myself don't even have to worry about the workings of it. I can just use it as is. I don't have to think about the concept of orchestra and a note and score and all these things because I'm working with a sound on a timeline that I'm able to craft over time. Building this object was pretty straightforward. It didn't take much time. Just to note, one of the things I don't have too much time to talk about, but Blue has now not just one kind of layer, not just sound objects. There's multiple systems here. I can I've created a whole set of layers that are just audio objects. And these audio objects give the functionality of a digital audio workstation. You can modify the fades, constant power, symmetric, and these fades look familiar. They're from Ardor. I re-implemented Ardor's fade system completely in C-Sound UDOs and made the interface here in Blue. And just one more example of this kind of sound system here. This object, I just wrote it as a particle. This came not from me, right? This was actually, if you know Adrian Moore's book, Sonic Art, he shares in the book a toolkit of Blue objects, or Blue instruments. I think those are written before any of this changes to sound. He had an instrument called Particle. It was USS Particle, and it was a Blue synth builder instrument in the orchestra. I took it and converted it into a sound and modified a couple things. And that allowed me to do this automation in time, and then to work with the particle kind of opcode and sound processing system on the timeline itself. Now, this object isn't bound to just this project. I can then copy it and paste it and move it to another project, no problem. Everything's encapsulated. Same with any of the instruments in the orchestra. If I had my alpha instrument, I could copy and paste it right in and reuse anything from other projects. Other users have contributed many different items. And these are all available online through Blue's BlueShare system. Oh, I don't have the internet up. But one can share instruments to upload and download from BlueShare within the program. So, to me, when I'm using C-Sound, I'm actually most often thinking about it within the kind of mindset of Blue, about how can I use C-Sound code optimally, right? Like I said in the very beginning, I found it very great for writing instruments and things like that, but things like modifying parameters, seeing many parameters, I found having a user interface to be more efficient. For scores, I found that writing scores out by hand for long blocks wasn't so efficient, but maybe in the small, maybe a note or two to create a gesture was okay. Right? But now Blue has become a kind of program on its own, and but it depends heavily on C-Sound. Blue also has added enough layers where a user coming into it may not have to even know C-Sound. that is ultimately the goal. And not because I think you should hide C sound, but because a lot of musical problems and things that we need to do can be solved problems. Right? You have a representation like an audio layer, an audio object. Those operations are things that we do constantly. There's no need to rewrite the code for that over and over again when we can just have an object that's built in. But then we also have that system to extend Blue however we wish. Taking us to today, C-Sound 6, we have a number of features: type system, arrays, function call syntax, live coding, new platforms, mobile and the web. At this point, Blue is still catching up, and this is the way it is for me. Sometimes adding new things to C-Sound takes a long time for me to start to take advantage of in Blue. The thing that would most make sense in Blue would be the live coding features. To then say, oh, I'm in Blue, I have a running C-Sound, I add a new instrument, oh, that's going to automatically update C-Sound, that's running. If I modify the instrument, you would update the C-Sound. But these features are also things that I find valuable elsewhere. And over the past couple of years, I've been having a kind of aesthetic crisis, trying to figure out different kinds of musical paths for myself. And I find myself right now trying to be open to anything that where inspiration goes. So. This is a recent piece I released. It was C-Sound code only. It was something I wanted to explore and try out. In this case, I had the idea to create my own wavetables randomly, right? And the way I did that was by using C-Sound's arrays from C-Sound 6. To initialize an empty array, and then to generate symmetric waveforms that had some quality of randomness. Some of them are shaped like square waves or sawtooth or triangle, but they're still jittering going on. That gives an interesting quality for the sound that gets used in the wavetable. I developed this using Vim. Using C-Sound as a server with the port option, and live coding really, but not live coding for performance, live coding for as part of my compositional practice. You can see that I'm using a lot of C-Sound 6 kind of qualities here. Arrays, I'm using the function call syntax pretty much exclusively. The code today that I look at when I write C-Sound looks a lot more like the code I use in other programming languages, whether it's Python or Ruby, JavaScript, JavaScript. And to me, that's a good thing. That's something I'm used to working in other systems, in other languages, so that it's not as much of a it looks familiar. Not too much time left. I'll try to figure out if I can. See this below. And so for yesterday, when I performed, I used this. It was a web page. It is a web page. wonderful thing about this was I was in a situation where I needed to do some improvisation, but the things I developed and brought with me weren't really appropriate for the material that was necessary. But I remembered I had built this page a while ago, and this page uses a web version of CSound, uses processing for the interface, and really the whole source code is pretty much just right here. The whole instrument of CSound is right here. It should all look very familiar, I think, to all of us. And it was really a wonderful experience that I could pull up this web page, not worry about my CSound setup or anything, it just ran. And I could use it for this situation. And I ended up using it yesterday in my performance, because I sort of enjoyed it. Yeah. Well, not too much time left. I'll just say CSound7, it's interesting. Thinking about the ways that I've been looking at CSound as just a tool, as something that enables my work as a programmer, as a composer. And now sometimes thinking about it in the lens of maybe being a performer, I find that there's a lot that CSound offers me. There's a lot that we can put into that will impact my usage of CSound moving ahead. So to get to the original question of, or the topic of how and why I use CSound today, I think that hopefully that I've shown a good bit of how I use CSound, but as to why, I find that with the tools I have based around CSound and the things that CSound can do, that I have a pretty efficient composition workflow. When I'm building instruments and building sound generators and building score generators, once I get to the point where I'm starting to use them, that I can work pretty quickly and intuitively to develop music. This all serves my creative interests very well. I find CSound very expressive. It is free and open source, means that, yes, pieces from 31 years ago still run today. I have a good sense that pieces 31 years from now, or from today, will run 31 years further from today. All of backward compatibility means that we have a long history of musical work that is being developed, that we can share, that we can study. Things that I developed years ago are still running and that I can use and experience today. CSound being cross-platform across desktop systems, mobile, web, and embedded means that I can use CSound as the core of a lot of different kinds of music work, whether if I have an interest to build an installation, it's an option. If I want to make a web page that I share and use as part of a performance, that was an option too. If I use it for composing on the Blue, great. It has a lot of possibilities. And to me, it's still inspiring and still growing very much. I have one moment. I just want to show one thing. One of the things I've long wanted was to have the ability to go back in time in a way to experience your pick. When I was younger and I was there, I think I was exposed to so many things, but it was impossible for me to really appreciate or understand these things deeply. Having some system for this was sort of a treat for me. I had the idea finally, like, oh, I'm going to try to build it. And I'll be using my pen, and hopefully this won't crash. Oh, I have no idea what this. Oh, I know. This was it's a prototype, right? It allows me to draw and play that sound, and you can see that it's built on top of C-Sound. It took me so little time to develop this prototype. I was so excited because it took me, really all of the work was in building the interface, but all of the sound generation was no problem. I had a whole library of things to use with C-Sound that I knew how to use and what to do. Really, maybe less than 10 hours to build this. And now I'm very excited because this will be the thing I focus on for the next thing to include into Blue, to then include into my musical practice. So, yeah, C-Sound's been fantastic. I enjoyed it as much today, if not more so than when I first started. And that's why I use C-Sound. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Very inspiring as always. And I think particularly anybody who hasn't seen Blue before would have been particularly intrigued and inspired. And the other goodies that you showed us. You filled up your time more, but I think it was kind of worth it just to see those few extra things that you had to show us there. Maybe if people have questions, you can ask Stephen in the break, or if somebody has a question that they think it might be interesting to share with all of us, maybe we can take one quick question.
Another question actually, just to remind of you that from tomorrow Monday until Wednesday, Stephen will be conducting a workshop at the School of Music of the University about Blue, composing with C-Sound and Blue. Those of you who are going to stay here in Montevideo, I think it's a great opportunity to see more about Blue and learn a little bit how to, or a gentle introduction into Blue.
Are there any other questions, comments? Okay, well, maybe we'll just round things off there and thank Stephen again.
Now we are having a coffee break, during which Stephen will be performing today. Ian, sorry. Ian will be performing today, and it's the best moment for another announcement. Ian will be also giving a workshop from Monday until Wednesday in the afternoon.
2 to 4.
Yes, from Monday to Wednesday in the afternoon from 5 to 7. And what's that?
I think it's 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock. It's in the program anyway.
Okay, so check on the webpage. I think it's announced on